Hello and welcome. My name is Aaron Stein, Director of the Middle East Program at the Foreign Policy Research Institute in Philadelphia, and you are listening to the Middle East Brief, a podcast focused on developments in the Middle East and why they matter for U.S. foreign policy. Be sure to subscribe to the Middle East Brief on iTunes and Spotify, and sign up to receive FPRI's Weekly Insights newsletter, where a link to the show will be delivered every 2 weeks straight to your inbox at www.fpri.org. Hello and welcome. Today I'm talking to Mule and Stinger, an F-15 weapons systems officer and an F-15 pilot, about a recent event that got a lot of press a couple weeks ago, which is about the finale of a contest for the U.S. military's AlphaDogfight challenge, which was to demonstrate the feasibility of developing effective intelligence autonomous agents capable of defeating adversary aircraft in a dogfight. In basic words, one person and a computer faced off against one another in a simulated dogfight, or I believe it's called basic fighter maneuvers. Correct me if I'm wrong, guys. And I thought of nobody better to talk about this than you two. So welcome to the show.
Thanks, Aaron, for having us on. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, and before we jump into this, I wanted to maybe start with you, Stinger. There was a lot of news about this. I mean, if you're on national security forums anywhere, there were lots of threads about this, and certainly my Twitter feed was going all over the place. So, what did you make of just this basic challenge that was going on?
So overall, the way I understood it was a DARPA program to better enhance artificial intelligence and run a competition for several developers to kind of come together and see what kind of problems that they can solve within this BFM construct. Overall, when I first saw it, the standard fighter pilot eye roll of, yeah, right, I'm not going to, I wouldn't lose to a machine or whatever. But the reality of it is that the way AI is going, there's a lot of advances I think that are very important, and this is sort of a development for that, and I think it's really awesome. There's a few things about that match, if you would call it that stood out to me, but overall, I think it's a really great direction for how they're going.
You got anything to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the beauty of that competition was that one, it happened over a series of days or a series of hours. So it was iterative. So you had the operators, you had the DARPA facilitators, and then you subsequently had the contractors or performers that were actually executing on the contract for each one of those. And they were able to close that loop, and they were able to watch each other interact. So it's rare that you have somebody who actually makes an AI agent or an AI algorithm gets to watch the operator fight against its product or the robot per se. It's kind of a discount or insult to AI in and of itself as far as a moniker. To make all that happen, and then to watch the operators almost fight as if they were fighting against other operators, which kind of proves that we're approaching the point where this agent might necessarily pass the Turing test. So that was really cool to see all three of those agencies kind of work together against each other on a big event, on a big scale, and a competition.
Well, so one of the things that was flying around was that, I guess a dogfight or basic fighter maneuvers is almost perfect for this type of simulation where you have an AI agent that was trying to defeat a human because of how a dogfight actually takes place. Now, as I always joke when either you, when Stinger or Mule, we talk in private, I sit in the back of airplanes, you sit at the front of airplanes. In the back of airplanes I sit at usually or have a 7 in front of it because it's a Boeing, or a 3 in front of it because it's an Airbus. Why is it perfectly set up for a machine to be able to do well in this type of environment?
Well, I guess I'll start off by describing kind of what BFM is. So if there's any listeners out there that can wrap their head around what it is that we're doing. So BFM basically describes 1v1 combat in a visual arena. In a perfect world, ideally, you'd want to kill your opponent kind of beyond visual range or a position where you have a preponderance of control. If you are someone in the infantry, you could kind of, it's kind of like a knife fight or a bayonet fight on a high-speed merry-go-round. There's a couple things that could drive you to that fight, rules of engagement being one of them. And there's some other things with technology v technology and things that could drive you to a closer engagement. So the way that that sort of plays out for AI is that your BFM is kind of the culmination of this OODA loop, which is this observe, orient, decide, and act loop, where things happen very fast and you have to make a decision and then act on that very fast. And so using AI to do that is a good kind of proving ground for developing AI to be able to do a number of other things in the future. I'm sure, Mule, you probably have something to add on that as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we talk about cues, actions, and mechanics when we teach these at all various levels of proficiency. And it was interesting to watch it happen, because you watch the machine and the algorithm see the cues, and there's things that we teach that are very simple that you should execute based upon what you see your opponent or the bandit do. And then you watch the AI algorithm do something a little bit different. And you listen to some of the feedback from the operators in the AlphaDog challenge, and they were like, that is not something that I would have expected to have done. And they just learned, right? It's as if you give an infant a bike and watch and see if they can figure out how to ride it. And I'm sure they're going to end up riding upside down, but at the same time, they're still moving down the street, which is exactly what those AI algorithms were doing. The other nice thing about BFM and why it's kind of well suited as a great place to start with aviation, the aviation application of artificial intelligence, is that it's a little more scientific. There's certain things we do in aviation, and particularly in aerial combat, that are art forms, and there are some things that are more of a science, right? So there's a series of not necessarily canned, but prescribed or expected answers that are going to come out of different things that the enemy does, and BFM is one of those things. It's the initial places that we can do that. In addition to that, you only have two actors per se. You have the aggressor and the defender, or the offender and the defender, and that makes it a little bit easier in basic fighter maneuvers, where in obviously aerial combat or any kind of joint warfare, you're going to have an innumerable number of people acting across multiple domains. So that's another great reason why BFM is pretty well suited for it. Additionally, you don't have to watch this thing go down a series of branch decisions over a long period of time, because typically these aerial engagements last anywhere from 3 seconds if the missile works correctly, or if you end up in an extended engagement, it's usually no longer than about 2.5 to 3 minutes. So that makes it really well suited for the context and the setup that they had for the AlphaDog challenge. And
there was, from a operator point of view, there's a few things that really stood out to me. And one of them was actually in the beginning. They put up a bunch of objectives about kind of how they were going to frame this. And it started out with the big overall objective was kill and survive, which is, of course, our ultimate objective to do in BFM or in warfare, really in general for us. And then they went through these sub-objectives. They had recognize and exploit adversary weakness, which is awesome. And I would 100% be on board with. Another one was maneuver to a position of control. And that's a little bit more of a trainingism that I think when you look at how the dogfight kind of played out there, it actually hurt the human operator, and I can get to more of that later. And the other one was 100% valid shots and kills. As you know, the dogfight was set up as a guns only dogfight, to where it started out very neutral. And normally we have missiles, we have heat-seeking missiles, we have radar-guided missiles, and then we have the gun in our quiver, if you will, and then they wanted to make it just a gun-only fight. So they had 100% valid shots and kills were one of the sub-objectives, and then deny and defeat weapons engagement zones was kind of the last objective there. And then that's how they sort of framed it. The reason why I thought the maneuver to a position of control was interesting is because most of the kills or shots that the AI took were not really from a position of control as we would consider it in a traditional sense. It was really more opportunity shots, high aspect gunshots, which are extremely hard to do in real life. They take quite a bit of finesse, and they also go against our normal training rules. We have a training rule that we fight with, which is 135 degrees off the nose of gunshots. And in this case, the AI didn't really see that. It didn't really abide by that. And just like in real combat, they were able to take whatever shots that they wanted. And I think they only needed about a 51% probability of success to decide whether they were going to take that shot. From the human operator perspective, these training rules were ingrained in how he was fighting, or at least how it appeared that way. and then he wasn't really willing to jeopardize his own safety or the safety of his aircraft to deny the ban or exploit a WES himself, if that makes sense.
No, it does, and it raises an interesting question. So the human pilot was flying a simulator, so he wasn't actually in a jet, but he still flew to the training rules, as you said, Stinger. So if you train like you fight, do the training rules actually create a hindrance in terms of like muscle memory, if I'm using the right words there, where the computer doesn't have any of that and just says that's the best way to do it, and so we're just going to go right after it. So is there, in some respects, like something you could learn from this, as you do man v man or person v person training, in that, well, you could really exploit this if you bust the training rules right at the outset in quote unquote real combat?
I mean, I think you're going to end up in a place where unless you are completely a remotely piloted aircraft, we have a cockpit that sits on the ground, and then you go fly these F-16s or F-15s or Raptors or whatever, you're still going to have to follow all these, and it'd be really hard to break people's tendencies that they learn, growing up once they go through the basic training in the fighter training unit, to say, hey, now your airplane is literally sacrificial because your body is not going to be part of this, and we have plenty of these things. We won't get into the economic conversation as far as burning up airplanes because you can smash them together. But I think that the other piece that it's not necessarily addressed on a regular basis when it comes to these training unit rules is that the remote possibility of smashing these airplanes together is just that remote. But should it happen, it's cataclysmic, and the actual severity of that risk and an event could be an atrocity. Whereas, like, if you can take these kind of risks without a person inside of the airplane, our worries and concerns are far less, because our human capital is the most valuable thing as far as military professionals go. And, eventually we can start to build more airplanes.
I think also it goes a little bit to learning about the tactical presuppositions that we kind of step out the door with. I know that Dr. Roper was talking the other day about coming up with AI that could not fight fair, and figure out how AI could exploit weaknesses in how we fight, and pertaining to different operational concepts. And I think that if you take this micro example of that, there might be several instances where how we assume the fight is going to go may not go exactly that way. And I think we've learned this lesson before. Vietnam sort of strikes me as that, going from a SAC culture, strategic air command culture, where safety was paramount, and then not really doing much in the air-to-air arena, and then entering Vietnam, where dogfighting was a little bit more common. And then you not really having the right skill set to be able to handle that. Now, notwithstanding, obviously, this is not a shot at the training rules, because the training rules were written in blood, ultimately to keep jets from smashing into each other. And in combat as well, if you swap paint or hit your jets together, you're probably going to be ineffective for your follow-on mission, which is most likely not BFM. So there's kind of a broader picture there of the human in the jet may want to preserve his aircraft for follow-on missions, follow-on taskings, and for AI, that consideration may not be there. So now we're looking at sort of what narrow AI is versus a broader problem set of figuring out if the juice is worth the squeeze from a risk matrix perspective, and et cetera, and we can go down kind of a rabbit hole on that. But anyways, I thought that it was interesting that AI was willing to just kind of go with the kill and survive objective, and then everything else was, peripheral.
Yeah, that's interesting. But and I think it's because a lot of people have seen the movie Top Gun, and I know that's the Navy, and two, I know that movie is kind of taboo because of how unrealistic it is. But it sort of created this culture that all you guys do is dogfight. Well, one, if you end up in a dogfight, have you already made a mistake, or have the rules been written in that they're forcing you to do something that adds the risk to the pilot or the aircraft, is one. And two, this was a 1v1 engagement with two F-16s. And last I checked, we make the F-16s, and we have a lot of data about how they operate. How would this fare in a world of uncertainty, where perhaps it's 1v3 or 2v6? Just throwing numbers out there.
Yeah, I mean, and I think a lot of that is we kind of boiled it down, and this is a phenomenal starting point. And then eventually, Aaron, you make a good point that we don't necessarily want to fight fair at all. So if we can bring 4 airplanes against 1 airplane, or 6 airplanes against the enemy's 4 airplanes, then it's going to make life a lot easier. And that's typically how it starts, is you start with these long range 4v6s or whatever, kind of Cold War-ish scenarios that may not necessarily be realistic for the current combat that we're fighting. And then it boils down to, we've made a series of mistakes, either forced by the enemy due to electronic attack to bring you inside of the visual arena, or your airplane made a mistake, or you just legitimately made a human error that forced you into this aerial combat, which, albeit unrealistic, I'll tell you that Top Gun was a phenomenal recruiting tool for the United States Air Force, and the unrealistic bravado that it incites is something to be had. And I think, as unrealistic as it is, like we pointed out, I think it's still something that it's challenging enough to make the machine fight you there. And it isn't something that we do a lot, but it is absolutely one of the most task saturating things that we do. So it requires a ton of attention to paying attention to airspeeds, and paying attention to where you maneuver the wings and where your throttle settings are. And it's a great equalizer for when you talk about the things you can do wrong in BFM. There's kind of 2 big things that you can do wrong. One is to make a bad decision, like legitimately select the wrong maneuver based upon what your enemy does, and that's a BFM error, right? And then the other category is kind of fighting bad BFM, as we call it. So you pull too hard on the jet, or you pull too light on the jet, or you put the throttles in the wrong place. And that second category is something that a machine just isn't going to do if it's obviously programmed correctly, because it doesn't have a cross check. It knows where all the numbers and all the throttles and all the wing positions are all the time. Whereas our eyeballs and our brains and our the feel of our body may lie to us, or we just may not be proficient. The machine shows up, and that second category is completely alienated. So those are some of the mistakes that you watch in Top Gun, of people making a bad choice, and we don't have the gas for this kind of stuff, Mav, but the machine just won't work. So it honestly is a pretty decent equalizer, again, circling back to BFM being an excellent choice of a place to apply artificial intelligence to aerial combat.
I'll take a stab at both of those questions as well. So first, as an F-15E pilot, I'd rather not do BFM if I can avoid it. And the F-15E is probably not the best at BFM compared to F-22s or Su-30s or Su-35s or whatever. And the other portion of that is when you get into a BFM fight and you're trying to exploit all the energy you can from your jet, generally your throttles are plugged in max afterburner, and you're wasting a ton of gas. The F-15E burns about 2,000 pounds a minute, and gas is such a precious commodity in the overall operational environment that you may not be able to even complete your follow-on tasking or what it is that you showed up to the battle to do. For other fighters that may be more air-to-air centric, maybe they want to get into a BFM match, but overall it kind of drains your SA, and if it focuses you on your opponent, you may not be able to see the wingman who may be getting into a weapons engagement zone on you, and you lose a degree of control over the overall battle, the overall situation that's going on. So generally like to avoid it to the maximum extent that you can. However, there's always situations where you can find yourself in it. So it is relevant. We do train to it, and it's a lot of fun. So that I think hopefully that answers kind of the first question that you asked there, right?
Yeah, definitely. It does look like fun. Although I think I would get airsick, to be completely honest with both of you guys. But the other thing that made me think, okay, is, I think what a lot of people think about when they saw that is that maybe this was the first step, and that maybe this is the first step to be going pilot list for things like outside of like sort of these, I guess, these surveillance drones or UAVs that we use, that we use a lot. But when both of you two were talking, the thing that it made me think about was, what if you brought it into the cockpit to make, I guess, the pilot, and this may sound culturally anathema, and maybe this is a good place to talk about the fighter pilot culture too, is, and maybe some of the newer aircraft, is whether AI could be brought in to make you better at BFM. together working in tandem in the cockpit, if that makes sense. That wasn't the most elegant question, but I think you know what I'm talking about.
It does, and the answer is absolutely. It's unequivocal. It's absolutely the fact that AI can enhance the pilot, and the reason is because when you have that OODA loop, what we talked about before, the decide portion of that is sometimes it takes the longest. And if you can have AI that sort of synthesizes, processes the information and is able to present that to you to be able to decide and act fairly quickly, I think that's awesome. And I think that the fighters have, little bits and pieces of AI. I'm not sure I would call them AI, but for example, a radar guided missile, you kind of tell it to go kill something, and then you can let it alone. And it'll go kill it. So there's kind of that. There's automation in tasks that we have, and I think driving towards that will ultimately make us more lethal. Where this comes into play with the human environment, and I don't really think that humans will be irrelevant as far as aircraft platforms go, and the reason why is that warfare is fundamentally social. I think that humans will always be required to make kind of human-only decisions, and AI is not at the point, and I don't foresee it being at the point for a while, to where you can assess things like, is my non-hostile adversary, does he demonstrate hostile intent, or was that a hostile act? How do I define self-defense here? Is the operational juice worth the squeeze as far as maybe disrupting an opponent? There's all sorts of ethical questions about it as well. But overall, I don't think that humans will be irrelevant, and I think that AI will enhance tactical aviators' ability to prosecute their mission.
Mule, anything to jump in there?
No, I do have a couple things, a few ideas that were thrown out there. I agree with what Stinger's saying. The other piece of the puzzle is that our enemies have clearly asserted that they want to cut us off from being able to be in control, and it brings in the ideas of, is there a human or decision maker in the loop? Is there a decision maker on the loop? Are they a part of any of this? And the atrocities that could occur if the machine is either makes the wrong choice, or heaven help us, the machine ends up being our enemy through various sort of control mechanisms, cyber or electronic attack or something like that, if we kind of let those things loose, which is frightening, depending upon the level of combat, and then the information impact or information operations impact that those types of things can have. Now, I'm immediately going to speak out of the other side of my mouth, which is that the most fragile and vulnerable portion of that airplane is probably the human being, right? Especially when you start to explore some of the ideas of hypermaneuverability, which DARPA has different programs that are fighting those things, and those ideas kind of at the academic level are great ways to survive. But the problem with hypermaneuverability is that if you pull 50 Gs, it'd probably squish my body into a pancake, right? I'm getting old, but anybody's body into a pancake, but that'll keep you from getting hit by a missile, and anything that isn't as maneuverable as you are, you're definitely going to win against. So that if you can you can release that aircraft to artificial intelligence, and it can make a maneuver like that, then we're probably going to win every single time. And that means removing the pilot and obviously the Wizzo out of those types of airplanes. But again, those tasks are very finite and specific. You're still going to need certain pilots for humans of any kind, the operators, to complete some of those tasks that require, again, more of the art portion of warfare than the scientific, I'm going to maneuver, I'm going to avoid this missile, and then I'm going to hit that exact airplane, which is a great venue or segue into, kind of loyal wingman concept that I absolutely want an artificially intelligent loyal wingman to release to do a finite task, and I give it a task where it starts, and then subsequently once it completes that, it comes back to me and it says, I've done this task, and I've solved problems that you didn't even know you needed to solve, and I've solved those in a way that you never would, which is technically the definition of artificial intelligence. But at the same time, I guess that technically puts the man on the loop when it comes to loyal wingman technologies, and that's a great place and an awesome application for artificial intelligence.
Explain that to the listeners who may not know what the loyal wingman is.
Yeah. Apologies.
That's okay.
I'm the worst at jargon there. So functionally, you would have an F-15. Obviously, we're biased flying, and then you would have either your own F-16 that's unmanned, or another smaller drone type UAS or unmanned aerial system that's flying right next to you on your wing, and you'd say, hey, I want you to go attack that fighter. It does what we tell it to because it's loyal, and then it would go out and it would execute BFM, or it would shoot missiles for you, and to be able to carry additional missiles and bombs that you wouldn't be able to carry on your aircraft based upon limited loadouts, and then it would go execute those tasks, and then it'd come back and rejoin and literally fly right on your wing, and you'd reduce the number of people that you'd need to fly that formation, because it's just you and your crewmate in the airplane, and then you could have 3 or 4 or however many of these loyal wingmen that you'd want, which is a concept the Air Force and other research labs are definitely pursuing fervently at this time.
I'll add on just a couple things if that's all right.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've kind of struggled with a little bit is that AI also kind of releases this Pandora's box for escalation pathways, and especially in like lower level, perhaps gray zone, if you want to use that term, type of warfare. AI may or may not draw escalation from an opponent when it could de-escalate a situation or whatnot, and I'm not sure AI is at the point right now where it's able to work out how do I navigate escalation pathways, especially if they're sort of non-traditional, and we saw that a little bit throughout the AOR in Syria, where you have kind of a hodgepodge of actors in in an area, and nobody really knows who's hostile and who's not, and who has hostile intent. We kind of go back to that. So in a linear sense, AI can be super valuable, I feel like, but when you start getting into nonlinear warfare, it's going to take a lot for AI to be at the level where you can actually turn it into something practical vis-a-vis your opponent, especially if we're talking great power competition, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one hang up that I would have, and I'm sure we can eventually get there, but I'm not sure that we're there right now, if that makes sense.
No, it does. And so that leads me to sort of like the final question here is, this is obviously the public-facing thing that DARPA decided to roll out. I'm sure that there's a lot that goes on behind the curtain that we'll find out about in some books, maybe 20, 30 years from now. But that's not what I'm asking you about. So the thing that I'm asking you about is, what do you think the future is? I mean, realistically, I don't think it's sort of Terminator 2 style, like machines flying, some super sci-fi looking aircraft in the future. I mean, if you look at budget allocation cycles and sort of the pace and integration of new systems, I think aircraft are going to look a lot like the aircraft today, maybe 10, 15, 20 years from now. But like, if you project out, and using this as a starting point, and it is a little bit of speculation, where do you think this is going?
So, I mean, looking at it, Aaron, you make a good point of, follow the money, and you can see where we're messaging and telegraphing the things that we're going to do. I think the first place that I would do it, and the easiest place, obviously besides doing basic fighter maneuvers, is just some general spectrum analysis, right? Like our antiquated way that we look at the electromagnetic spectrum, whether it be electronic attack or signals intelligence, in all kinds of fashions, is extremely rudimentary. And if you're able to train it, if it's whether it's a machine learning kind of level as far as artificial intelligence, or moving to the full-on artificial intelligence to go, hey, I see these 5 or 6 different signals all at once, and those are associated with this target, or it can generate its own next set of target. It's going to help us do targeteering far faster than we were able to do it in the past in order to find people, because all those intelligence channels, whether it's at a tactical or strategic level, are extremely stovepiped. If we can put those together and let the algorithm loose on them, and they'll be able to go, okay, this is exactly where our enemy is for targeting, and not only where the enemy is, but what is the most valuable one, and what's the likelihood of something that's going to start to unravel or be one of those centers of gravity. So I think targeteering is the first place for that, which is kind of at the operational strategic level when we think about these tactical artificial intelligence robots beating each other up on the battlefield. But I think to me, it's bigger than that when it comes to letting these things loose. And it also lends to our tendencies of bureaucracy and needing to have a person in the loop. To that is the AI algorithm can say, hey, I found all these things and I found this target you weren't even looking for, but it seems to be fairly critical the way that it's communicating with the rest of the enemy's architecture. And this is probably what you want to get after. So that's the way I would see it going.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. I'm a huge fan of Dr. Will Roper. He's kind of heading up the Air Force direction when it comes to AI and acquisitions and everything. And if I had to kind of predict the future, if I could, I would say that we're probably and hopefully going to see a little bit more disaggregation when it comes to platforms, and use AI to expand this disaggregated platform concept, and create, targeting problems for the enemy, as well as exploit new venues and use that as this multi-pronged big networked approach, instead of using what it is right now, which I think is a little bit more of kind of developing, the Death Star like big exquisite platform. We can use AI to kind of enhance these smaller, lower level disaggregated platforms, and then apply that to the operational concept that Mule was talking about. So I think that's important. One of the problems, though, I kind of see with AI is going to be, in addition to what I said before, is that when you have machine learning or artificial intelligence, you really have to kind of control what it learns. And we're going to have huge data sets. There's going to have to be a whole change, in my opinion, to the way that we run acquisitions, the way that we run funding, in order to facilitate sort of an update plan, if you will, to big data sets, be able to field these things and update them fairly fast. I think that those are huge challenges that the Air Force is going to have to navigate through in order to get to where they want to go. But ultimately, I see that as the future.
And that's really interesting. It makes you think about, particularly those disaggregated platforms, just something as simple or taking for granted, updates to your iPhone, or if you drive a Tesla. I do not. I drive a Subaru. Being the ability to get, automated updates to the essentially the operating system of the car, blasted out, and just something as basic as that. I know that still is not something that goes into particularly some of these jets that you guys fly, because of, they were developed a long time ago. And so just, thinking in increments, not Terminator 2, Sarah Connor, stuff like that, but like moving towards something that Stinger was just talking about, which is just like basically trying to figure out how to rapidly update and keep updated a series of disaggregated platforms or platforms that cost less money into the future, and then, and applying them to the operational concepts of the Air Force. I hope I did a good job summarizing that. If I didn't, correct me. But is there anything I didn't ask you guys that I should have asked you? Because we're coming to the end here, and I want to make sure that we hit every topic. But, I am curious if there are any final thoughts before we do the wrap up here.
I think it's a good topic when it talks to research and development, or, obviously acquisitions therein. You kind of got to talk to some of the barriers that you might face, right? So, Aaron, you kind of stepped into some puddles there as far as security goes, when it comes to getting a hold of, being able to let this algorithm loose in different places in our information technology architecture that we currently have set up. Either we're going to have to take an enormous axe to all of it in order to let us move at the speed of relevance, and certainly at the speed of our threat. Or we're going to have to create an entirely new apparatus in order to achieve those things. Both of those are very ethereal and academic as far as when it comes to DoD acquisitions, but it's something we're going to have to get after, and then we're going to really have to change our culture to get out of our own way. When it comes to things like, here's an easy answer, and we say, well, no, this is the way we've always done it, to move forward in those things, because it's certainly scary when it comes to acquisitions and security there. And the other piece culturally is, we will have to relinquish some control, which in the midst of the last 20 years, the way we've been fighting, we've taken more control and gotten further into different tactical or task-oriented decisions. And when it comes to this, we'll have to completely remove ourselves from those loops, which are some absolutely human attitude decisions that will have to be made over the course of these developments.
Before you go, Stinger, what you mean by more control is that the advancement of technology allows for people, say, sitting in Washington, to look at what you're looking at, maybe flying somewhere over the Pacific, so long as the satellites line up, and then they can make decisions for you, or at least try to. If I want to simplify.
That's 100% right. Yeah, and reachbacks become far easier based upon broadband technologies and overhead satellites and things like that. And when you say that you're going to let an artificially intelligent machine do things for you, and without slowing it down by gaining controls or approving things for it, that's the absolute opposite direction than what we've been moving in the last 20 years.
Yeah. Stinger, why don't you take us out with the final word, and don't forget to give the disclaimer.
All right. Well, let me give the disclaimer before I forget, but I'll say that the views of myself and Mule are our personal views, and they're not reflective in any way, shape, or form of the Air Force or the Department of Defense or anybody associated with the government. So now that that's out of the way, I guess that the final thoughts are that overall, I think that this contest is really awesome. The way that we've been moving forward with AI and some technology developments is really great, especially when we look at what's going on with China and how they recently released their whole AI strategy from their national government and how they kind of want to take preeminence in that role. And it's great to see that we're working towards being able to develop that in all shapes and forms. I'm curious to see how we're going to go in the future, whether AI is going to be a little bit more kinetic in nature, or the operational arm, or if it's going to be a little bit more social in nature, with respect to controlling narratives and et cetera, and non-kinetic effects and all that sort of stuff, which I think may be important. So I'm really anxious to see what's going to happen with it, and I'm really glad that you had us on the show. And we, anytime you want anything answered, we can do that.
Yeah, no, this has been great, and I appreciate you guys coming on and talking through something complicated. I hope I did a decent job moderating, and I hope everybody enjoyed. So with that, Mule, Stinger, thank you for joining, and thank you everybody for listening.